Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I am an author of over 30 novels and a high school English teacher as well. And on this week's episode, I am excited to have a returning guest, Bethany Turner. And this is the next book in her series. For those who are interested, she's been on before. You can listen to us talk about Cole and Layla Are Just Friends on a previous episode. And I've put her books in my room, and my students have enjoyed them, and I think our listeners will as well. So this time, we're going to be talking about the book Wes and Addie Had Their Chance. Bethany, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Bethany Turner. I live in Cortez, and I write romantic comedies. And this is, Wes and Addie is actually published book number 11, so I'm not quite up to your more than 30 yet. That's mind-blowing to me. I'm really excited to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for taking the time. I know we're approaching release date, which is always kind of chaotic and all over the place, getting ready for that. So tell us a little bit about the series itself, and then who are we looking at, and what is the premise for the story for Wes and Addie Had Their Chance?
These 3 books, the first one being Brent and Sebastian hate each other, and then, like I said, Cole and Layla are just friends, and now Wes and Addie had their chance. It's the class of 2003 from this little town, little fictional Colorado mountain town called Adelaide Springs, and it's tiny, tiny little town, and so their class was 5 people. Bryn and Cole and Layla and Wes and Addie. That was their group growing up. And they all went their separate ways and did various things, had various life experiences, but they're all finding themselves back in Adelaide Springs and encountering love in various ways through hate, friendship, or second chances. So as we're dealing with Wes and Addie, their story is very much, through Brent and Sebastian and Cole and Layla's stories, there were little nuggets mentioned about Wes and Addie, but not much. It's like they were the two that no one really talks about all that much. Especially Wes, because 20 years ago, the last time they saw Wes, he left Addie at the altar there in Adelaide Springs when they were 18 years old. No one really has great impression left of him, but now he's gone on to be a very successful senator in Connecticut and is actually maybe the front runner for president. And so he finds himself back in Adelaide Springs in Colorado. And Addie also has found herself back there after some tragedy and kind of having to rework her life. And yeah, it's a reunion neither of them were counting on.
And are both rather surprised to find themselves in that situation. Which is great.
Very much so.
And I do want to add, just because with everything going on in the world today, people may hear politics and be like, ugh. So this book has nothing to do with politics in the sense of parties and issues and blah, 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 and all of that. So don't worry there.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, because I think that is such a huge, that was really a thing I had to push with wanting to even write the story. And it was no, we're not going to touch politics. I'm telling you, this book has nothing to do with politics. You will reach the end of this book and you won't know what Wes stands for as a politician. It doesn't even matter. It's about the job and the power and the position versus the life maybe he wants to lead. So yes, thank you for pointing that out.
Well, and if I remember right, when we talked last time, this was originally planned to be the first book in the series. But I think you said the political climate at the time made your publisher to be kind of maybe that's not what we want to focus on right now.
In fact, it really wasn't even meant to be a series to begin with. This story, Wes and Addie's story, was a standalone book that I started writing more than 10 years ago. And it was very different than it turned out to be. But it was this same vein of this political frontrunner having to go back to his little small hometown and not being welcome. I could not get it through the door because just the word politics scared everybody off. And so I found myself, though, with all these side characters that I'd fallen in love with, and this little town, and the backstories surrounding all these people. And I wasn't ready to let them go. So I created some new stories that happened in the same little town, and kind of I was not contracted for a series in any way, shape, or form. So it was kind of let's see what happens. And hopefully, if I play my cards right, they'll want to know about these other characters too, and I'll get to keep telling these stories. And thankfully, that's what happened.
I'm so glad it did. And honestly, I'm really glad that the order went the way that it did, because you have both Wes and Addie who are coming back to Adelaide Springs. And I was trying to imagine how the story would have connected with me differently had I not known so much of the history of the other characters and what they were walking back into and what they had missed by being gone the longest. And in my imaginings seemed like such a different story. It was just weird to think, if this had been the first introduction to everybody, obviously I'm sure you still would have done a fantastic job with it, but it would have been a different kind of connection. And I really loved how I connected with the story and the characters in this one. So I'm really glad that this went the way it did, because I think it was really nice to know all that history coming into this story.
Well, me too. And I wrote actually my author's note in the book, which I was so grateful for the audiobook. I got to record it. I was like, please let me just say this in my own voice because it was so important to me. And what I used my author's note to say was, hey, writers out there who have faced rejection, who are about to give up on the story that you are so passionate about, don't. But look at it as an opportunity. And sometimes it's hard to do in the moment. I certainly didn't know it would go the way it would go. I hoped to some extent, but I had no guarantees. But really, it's the timing of it. If it had gone my way, I never would have written Brennan Sebastian and Cole and Layla's stories at all. And just as the writer of those characters, that breaks my heart. I can't imagine not having those characters in my life. Sometimes the rejection is honestly the best thing. But you don't always realize that till later, of course.
Yeah, it hurts in the moment, but sometimes those can be really great learning experiences. And just, if you can push through it, you can really grow and push yourself okay, this isn't what's wanted in the industry at that moment, or, the skill level's not there, or whatever it is. If you keep trying and keep polishing and keep working on it, and sometimes just wait until the right time. Sometimes it's just not the moment for that story.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you're so right. You hit right on it. There's always something to learn from every rejection. And, sometimes it's just their loss. And that's okay too. Sometimes it's just they're going to wish later that they had said yes to you or whatever the case may be. And you can't help those things either. But even in those moments, golly, yeah, they do strengthen you. They do build you up. But 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, whatever they're having to say to you is something that will make you better. That takes time, that takes work, takes building up your thick skin to get to that point. But golly, yeah, rejection can be so valuable.
I think once you've gone through the process once or twice, most people do start to develop that thicker skin and the sense of what to take in and listen to and what to maybe be okay, well, it's not their cup of tea. That's fine. I can move on and find someone different or a different audience or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with this one, what I wanted to ask you about, because it's interesting in romance because series tend to be a little bit different, especially contemporary romance, where it's a series, it's linked characters or a linked location, and then they're kind of standalone stories within the world rather than one overarching story. So that already makes writing a series a little bit different. But for this, since you had Wes and Addie at the beginning and then kind of worked back around to them, I was curious what that process was like of writing the other 2 books, then coming back to this one to revise and add in bits of the other 2 stories and tying it all together. Because usually that last book in the series for me is the hardest and I agonize over it and it takes me forever.
It was really interesting. It was really fun, honestly, because the way it worked out. So when Wes and Addie got rejected, what I thought was, the final time, and I was kind of ready to give up on them, but not give up on all the side characters. I thought, but I still wanted to leave the door open. That was the thing. It was whatever. I don't want to say that their story can never happen. So basically then, from the beginning of this story I'd been writing for a decade, I went back in time and basically created the prequel I guess is how you would look at it. And always having, so I know the point where Wes and Addie start. So at that point, it was just, okay, make sure that still works. Make sure that door is still open, which was so really easy to do in that regard and so being able to then focus on these other people. And I did always kind of look at it as I'm building to what I know eventually happens, whether it ever happens or not. And so then having the only character who was not in Wes and Addie's story originally even mentioned was Sebastian. So I was looking at, okay, I know it's Cole and Layla, their end game in my mind. And so what do I do about Bren? So starting there and just creating a story for her and creating this new guy who was outside of the five of them who grew up together. And really from there, I mean, I felt like it was a beautiful thing because I felt like I knew these characters so well because I knew where they ended up. And not Bren and Sebastian as much. Again, that was more of a different thing there, kind of sticking out to the side that I had to figure out how to incorporate. But all the other side characters to Wes and Addie's story, I already knew their stories. And so, yeah, it was just, I wouldn't ever suggest anyone do it that way, but actually I would. Like, if I could do it that way every time, I think I would, the more I think about it, because it was so fun. And knowing, again, okay, I may never get to publish Wes and Addie's story. So always looking at it, because, yeah, not only did I not have a contract for Wes and Addie's story, like I said, I didn't have a contract for a series at all. So Bren and Sebastian Hate Each Other was a standalone. And just being able to, at the same time, I'm having to write this story to fulfill my contractual requirement of a standalone book and make sure the door is left open for the story that is still to be told. It was weird. I couldn't have planned it, but I loved the way it turned out.
I think that really speaks to the idea of those deep dives into character profiles and writing scenes of a backstory that aren't necessarily going to be included in the book, but that help a writer really figure out who that character is and experience them in a way that isn't reliant on plot points, I guess. You can just explore them and do what you want and then set it aside, and it doesn't have any impact on the story, but really helps you get to know that character a lot more. Interesting because I'm not an outliner, whatever you want to call it, pantser, discovery writer, gardener, all those terms. That's usually how I write. So I'm discovering the characters as I go. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, this character is not who I started with. I better go back and change the beginning. I'm really intrigued of actually knowing the characters so well when you start and what that would be like to write that way, because it's very foreign to me.
And me too, friend. It was crazy because I'm with you, total pantser, total make it up as I go. But to have that, but also I'll say, I still didn't outline. It was just that I knew these people. And that was so freeing of just, okay, I've heard it said that if you're completely stuck in your writer's block, you should either kill someone or kiss someone. And I love that. And I've never killed someone, but I do it with the kiss theme a lot of just, okay, I'm going to throw a kiss in here, even though they're not ready for it. And it's not going to make it to the end of the book, but it's because, it's okay, what can I do to just completely pull these characters out of their comfort zone and all of that? And so I felt like by knowing that Cole and Layla were going to end up together when I'm writing, because, I know in Wes and Addie's story, they're already together because that's how I wrote them 10 years ago. And yet I'm going back far enough that there's not even a hint of romance yet. And so being able to, almost like I got to see their whole movies play out before my eyes and know the life they have ahead of them. And so, again, not pulling that into any sort of outline or plot points, but just knowing them. Yeah, it was it was so fun.
Well, I'm glad you were able to have that experience and just try something new in your writing process. I think we get so stuck sometimes in this is the way we do things, or this is how I work best. And it can be really hard to push yourself to do something completely different and see where it goes.
Yes.
So it might be a giant waste of time, but it could. be really exciting and teach you a lot of things about yourself and your own writing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. I feel like I hit the jackpot with that, because
Yeah.
yes, you're right. It could have been a total waste of time.
Well, one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about the characters Wes and Addie, they have some similarities in their backstories in some of the tragedies that they've dealt with in their lives. But they still have really individual personalities and identities. And that can be really hard to achieve in creative writing. Sometimes as you're writing those characters, and I see this especially with newer writers, everybody kind of starts to meld together and sound and act and be a little bit too similar because you as the writer are in all of their heads, and that can mush it all together when you're writing it.
Right.
But I thought that was something that really stood out, even though they had those similarities in their backstories. They were still very different from each other, and they handled things differently, and they had to find ways to bridge those gaps and find their way through their differences, even with, like, on the surface, you might look at them and be like, well, you've experienced similar things. Like, you should just be able to figure it out. Like, that gives you the common ground to come back together on. But it's not that simple. I wanted to ask you about developing that and keeping the characters unique, even when they do have some similarities like that.
Yeah, well, I think so much of that with these two characters in particular was just, it was what they've gone through apart. It's like, yes, they have all these similarities, this same background, this, even apart. Wes was in politics, Addie was in the CIA, they were both in Washington and didn't know it, all these things. So their lives overlap even when they were living completely different lives. But it's the paths they each took. And all of that for me always came back to that moment of Wes choosing to leave and Addie finding out that Wes had left. And the ways that they handled that and figuring all of that out. And, and I think I always say too that, I'm so glad that there are stories about characters in their 20s. And obviously I love those stories too. For me personally, as a writer, I love writing 30s because I feel like, and actually we're like 40, I think, in this book because I had to age them up because of where I started. But being able to be at this point where, I feel like in your 20s, you feel like you've experienced a lot, but then you don't, as you get to your mid to late 30s, you get to your 40s, it's like, oh, no, for the most part, what I had experienced in my 20s was nothing compared to what was coming. And there are always exceptions, of course, but just in general. And so being able to have these characters who have, golly, life's been hard in some ways, and just fictional characters, just like real people, we all deal with pain differently. And so I feel like that, I'd love to say, so I was really intentional about doing this for Wes and that for Eddie, and it wasn't that really. It was as I followed their journeys and I knew what they had gone through, because yes, it's a romantic comedy, but I deal with some of the hardest stuff I think I've actually dealt with in any of my books between these two. And having that pain and how they dealt with it completely shaped them to the end. And so, and also being able to look a little bit at the previous few books and what the other characters had said about them, that basically that we knew nothing about Wes other than we see him on TV. Sometimes he's a senator. And it's like, okay, that kind of creates this, I think we have a stigma in our head already about him. And then Addie, it was always almost poor Addie, almost, she went through so much and yeah, we don't, we're so sad about Addie. And so knowing that that's maybe the way everyone around them is going to view them, and yet both of these people don't want to be viewed the way that they're being viewed. And so pushing back against that really did just define their characters for me so much.
I really like that. It reminds me, like, working with younger writers, we're drawn to the stereotypes at the beginning. This is this type of character, this type of character. And that can be a great starting place. You take those characteristics that are attached to that, and then you work with them. But something I always try to reiterate with young writers is if you want to start there, you're going to fill up your cast, you need these types of characters to play certain roles. That's fine, but you can't stop there. Then you've got to figure out, what do you add to that? How do you make them individual and unique and give them some real personality? And I think that is something you did a really great job with in this book, that you think, oh, politician. You immediately, whatever someone's political leanings might be, I think we all kind of have those things that immediately pop into mind of like, oh, that kind of person. And, it's similar with Addie's backstory of going into government service in something that's dangerous, even though she spends some time in there, but a lot more on the analyst side. And so you like have these things that can be really easy to just lean into those stereotypes. But when you're bringing them back home to people who knew them, but don't really know them anymore.
Oh, that nails
really
it right
pushes.
there.
And I enjoyed the town's reaction to them and their reactions and how those kind of intermingled and had different effects on different people. Because you did make them different from what your initial ideas are. You added in those layers of depth. And you did deal with a lot of pretty heavy things for being a romantic comedy. And there's still plenty of funny stuff and laughing and all of that. But you brought in those serious layers that pushed them to different emotional levels than what you might typically think of for romantic comedy. And I really loved that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was, I think that we find the greatest humor in our pain quite often. How many times, obviously funerals are such sad occasions, but how many, families sit around after the funeral when all the stress is releasing and they're telling stories and you're just laughing about the funny things that happened with this person you've just lost. And it's like laughter is so often our healing. And so I love being able to focus on that. And yeah, like you said, I loved what you said about, they knew them, but they don't know them. And that was so pivotal. And, I can think of just this one, it's a really pretty insignificant moment in the book, really. But Wes says something to Addie like, well, I know how close you and Layla are. And Addie just replies, you don't know anything about me. And it's insignificant, and yet the fact that is just her immediate response is pushback. And yet, it's like, I think that was another thing that separated them so much as characters, is Addie was left to pick up the pieces. Wes kind of left with this image of Addie that he'll never forget, and it's almost a little, even though, the reasons he left and all of that obviously have to be, and there's no good excuse for leaving ever. We don't try to sugarcoat that, but there were legitimate things going on in his life. But being able to look at it as, to him, she's still the girl he loved and regrets walking away from. And to her, he's the loser who left her. And just like he's not really what we think a politician might be, and she's not really what we think this CIA officer might be, it's like they're also not how they envision each other. It's like Addie's not this sweet, innocent thing that he left behind, and Wes isn't the villain that she's cast him as for the past 20 years. So I don't know what the point was in that, so I don't even but yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying about the ages, because had this story taken place mid-20s, 5 years or so after she's left at the altar and he disappears, this story would not have gone the same way, at least not believably.
No. Yes, agreed.
And 25-year-old Addie, going through this, it would have still been lots of anger and a really rocky road to forgiveness.
Yes.
I think you need,
oh my goodness,
that life experience and the perspective. And they both go through so many other just life moments outside of Adelaide Springs, away from all their other friends and family, that shaped them, that have turned them into who they are in that moment. And I felt like that was really something that stuck out as a theme, or just, something to think about throughout the story of just, and maybe because I'm hitting that point as well, where it's like you run into someone and you're like, oh, hey, yeah, I remember you from high school. And it's like, yeah, that's totally not the same person that I knew 20 some odd years ago. But
Absolutely.
like it is a brand new getting to know someone experience, even if it's someone that you grew up with. Like you
Hmm.
can't just make those assumptions and go back to that little frozen in time moment from whenever it was you last saw someone. Like just
Right.
giving each other that space to be someone different than who they used to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that was really important to me too, and at first I didn't know it was going to go this way. And I think actually when I started writing this story, before I wrote the other Adelaide Springs stories, it wasn't this way. But it became important to me that Addie had truly moved on. It wasn't, I mean, obviously she still has feelings about what happened. It was a major pivotal moment in her life and it shaped her in so many ways. But she fell in love. She had a happy marriage. Wes is not the love of her life anymore. And being able to, which for listeners, Addie is widowed, which is like on the back cover copy. That's not a spoiler, but it's an important part. So, having lost the man who really ended up being the great love of her life, even though, as we all at 18 years old, when we're in love, we think that person is the person. And, sometimes it is, but more often than not, it's not. So having that perspective was so important to me of she's lived life and it really has nothing to do with coming back to her first love. It has to do with meeting this guy who she has this history with and finding forgiveness and seeing who he is now. Like you said, getting to know each other as they are now. And it's like that's when the love story begins. This isn't a continuation of a 20-year-old love story or a 30-year-old love story. It's a chance at love again after everything that's been lost.
I love that. And I love that this is where, at least at this point, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the series kind of comes to its conclusion. I think that was a really
Hmm.
great place to stop. And it kind of leads us into, we're already at the time to start wrapping up. I looked up and I was like, oh, shoot. All right, we got to start. Because you're always so much fun to talk to and it goes really quickly.
Oh, you too.
But before we wrap up, tell everyone when the book comes out, where they can find it, where they can find you, and all of that so they can stay up to date and in contact.
Yeah, absolutely. So it comes out so July 15th. Oh, goodness. And I'm going to be kind of in the area a fair amount. So actually, you and I are going to be at Quill and Quest in Farmington on the 19th. And I'm really looking forward to that. And I hope people will come out for that. And which is also my birthday. So I really feel like I need to just beg people, you have to come out. It's my birthday. That would be so depressing if no one comes. But yeah, and you can stay connected with me at cbethanyWright.com. Or actually, this is big news. I got BethanyTurner.com a couple months ago after it not being available for the past 15 years. I've been trying to buy it. So actually, you can go to BethanyTurner.com. I forget to get that one out.
Oh, fun. All right.
But those are ways to connect with me for sure.
Awesome. Well, we'll put those links and the book signing information in the show notes for anyone who wants to come and stop by. Come meet Bethany, talk about the books, and we're going to have a fun chat about writing romance and all kinds of things. So it'll be great.
So looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to chat with me today and for sharing the book. I really enjoyed it and I had a great time talking to you.
Oh, I'm so glad. I always enjoy talking to you. Thank you.